Here we are in Chapter 4 folder. We're going to be working on this file titled Greg Lawler _Niece. Go ahead and open that file up by double-clicking it. And opening it up in Photoshop. I have to go to full screen view mode. Spacebar to reposition the image near the top part of the screen, and Command plus to zoom in. We're checking out the photograph and we notice something that is pretty common in photography that we need to fix, and that is reflective color. There was this big blue sign and light was hitting this blue sign, and then the light coming off of the sign was blue, so we can see that in her hair up here. We need to remove that reflective light in her hair. The rest of the image looks great, so we need to focus in on this area. So let's zoom in a little bit, Command plus, and reposition the image. Click on our adjustment layer icon and select Hue Saturation. We're going to go to our blues, Command 5 or Control 5 to get there. Now, what we need to do first is use our eyedropper to select the blues that we want to work on, and then swing the hue slider and the saturation up so we can see if we actually have all the color that we need to work on. If we zoom in a little bit more, we notice that, you know what, I don't have everything that I need there. So I'm going to grab my eyedropper with the plus icon, and I'm going to select all of the hair here where I'm seeing the blue come in. Of course, I don't want it to shift this way, but what I'm doing here is exaggerating the saturation and the hue so that my selection is even more precise. Now, this is a real common problem with photographs, so I'm hoping that this technique will be helpful for you. Once we've done that, all that we need to do is go back to 0 and 0 for our hue and our saturation, and then desaturate. All we're doing is pulling the blues out. The rest of the hair color looks great. Click OK. Here's our before and after. Awesome. Our final step with this image is going to be to create a curves adjustment layer and add an S curve here just to increase the contrast and color saturation. Click OK. Let's Option or Alt click the eye icon in our background layer. Here's the before and after. Hit Tab and F to go to full screen view mode. That image looks good, and that wraps up this quick movie. I hope it was helpful. Bye for now. We're going to be working on the image Orwig cameras.psd. So go ahead and double click that file to open it up in Photoshop. F to go to full screen view mode, spacebar to reposition the image. We're going to approach this image 2 steps here, 2 different movies. The first piece is going to be about cleanup. We're going to look at how we can clean this image up in regards to a few things we need to remove as well as tone. And then in the second movie, we're going to look at how we can color correct this image. Well, first things first, this is a photograph of myself holding a bunch of cameras, kind of a fun photo. And I noticed that on one of the cameras, there's a tag on the cover of the lens cap. So I want to remove that. Press Command spacebar or Control spacebar to toggle to your zoom tool, and then click and drag to zoom in. That's a tag we want to work on. We're going to use a new selection tool, the quick selection tool, and all that we have to do is simply click and drag, and it will give us a really nice selection of that white area. From there, I'm going to press Refine Edge, and I want to expand this edge so it goes a little bit beyond the tag there, and click OK. Alright, well, now that I have that selected area, I'm going to create a new layer, Command N or Shift Control N, and call this Lens Cap Tag. Grab the clone stamp tool, and I'm then going to simply clone stamp away this tag. Now, one of the things that I'm doing with my clone stamp tool, you'll notice that it's not on a line. I can sample this same area every time I click, and so it's just going to be about multiple clicks. Command H is going to hide those marching ants. That's really helpful sometimes when you need to just get rid of those marching ants. And one of the nice things about having a selection is I know I'm not going to damage the rest of the image too much because I'm focused in on this little area here. Alright, Command H brings back those edges, and then Command D, or Control D of course, will deselect that selection. Let's double click the zoom tool to see how we're doing. Nice, that looks pretty good. If we click the eye icon before and after, that looks pretty good. Next step is we want to work on the tonality of the background here. Just a little bit too hot on this side. There's too much brightness there, and I want to do that in a pretty quick way. Well, here's one technique that you can use. Select your marquee tool. Press M on the keyboard. Select this right half of the image over here, click in the background, and press Command or Control J. What that will do is it will copy this to a new layer. Now that we have it on a new layer, we're going to take our blend mode to multiply. Ah, that looks great. We can see that we're bringing the tones down of the background. Now that I can see that, I'm going to Option or Alt click the mask icon. That will fill the mask with black. Grab my brush tool. I'm going to paint with white, and what I'm looking to do here is to paint across the background to bring down this area that I feel is a little bit too hot. Alright, let's turn this layer on and off, our before and after. Lower it a little bit so we can see what's happening. Hey, that looks pretty good for a pretty quick fix. Let's go ahead and Option Alt click eye icon. There's our before and after. Alright, just a little bit of cleanup and a little bit of tone work. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do these first initial steps is because a lot of times what happens is we skip our initial cleanup steps when we get to our color correction. What we want to do is clean up our image first and then color correct because the results are going to be stronger. Let's color correct this image. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Grab your eyedrop tool by pressing the I key on your keyboard. And then in your options bar, select something other than point sample. Point sample will select the actual pixel that you click on. You want something higher than that. It's going to select 11 by 11 average. Now I'm going to zoom into an area. And let's go ahead and zoom in on this area right here. One thing we're going to notice is that this is indeed blue. Eyedropper, shift click to set a point there. Next, we're going to go to our info palette, and we're going to set our options to RGB color. And click in the background. There we can see our RGB numbers. And one of the things we're noticing is that there is indeed a big color shift, and so we want to fix that. So we're going to click in our top layer, click on the adjustment layer icon, and select curves. We're going to color correct by the numbers. We know that neutral colors, like black, should have equal amounts of red, green, and blue. So I'm going to go to the channel with the biggest problem, which is the blue channel. So I'll go to my blue channel, click on that point. That's telling me the tones are somewhere down here. So what I'm going to do is bring those way down. Next, I'm going to go to my red cyan channel. Bring those up. Now my RGB values are pretty close. Click OK. And let's zoom out a little bit, see how we're doing with this particular color correction. Zoom in actually so we can see what's happening. Here's our before and after. Hey, that looks pretty good. And that wraps up our work on this image. I'll catch you in the next movie. What I want to introduce is the topic of color correcting skin tone by the numbers. Alright, I have a simple file that I want to pull up that will help us begin to understand how to color correct skin by the numbers. Go back to Photoshop here for skin. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to set a sample point on a specific area of skin. And then we're going to read those CMYK numbers. And what we need to have these numbers equal is this. The recipe for color correct skin tone is cyan 1/3 to 1/5 of magenta yellow. Magenta and yellow are close, yet magenta is a little bit higher. What would sample numbers potentially be? Well, something like this. Cyan of 10, magenta of 30, yellow of 32, and then black of 0. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I don't even know what these numbers mean. Well, stick with me for a second, and let's talk about this topic in more detail. Back to the bridge. I'm going to open up the file skintone.jpg. This handout will provide you with more information about color correcting skin by the numbers. Also, as a side note, I've talked about this in my Photoshop for Photographers Essentials training, and there are a number of examples there. But the long of the short of it is this. What you do is you find a diffused highlight, you set a sample point, then in your info palette, you set your eyedropper numbers to read CMYK. And then what you're trying to do is get these CMYK numbers into this general recipe. Your cyan at 1/3 to 1/5 of your magenta and your yellow the highest of the number. And as a side note, these numbers are typical for Caucasian skin. The darker the skin, the overall numbers will be higher, and the ratio of the cyan to the magenta yellow will be a little bit higher as well. Alright, this recipe is just a starting point, but it's really helpful when you need to color correct and you have skin tone in an image. With this rough introduction to this topic of color correction by the numbers, let's apply this knowledge to an image and see how this all actually works out. We'll be working on the file skin by the numbers. Go ahead and open that file up in Photoshop. I have to go to full screen view mode. Spacebar to move the image near the top part of the screen. Well, we have a sample layer here. And this is what the image looks like color correct. And here we can see there is a drastic color shift. So we need to fix that. Let's go ahead and open up our info palette so we can see our info palette there. let's collapse our color palette by double-clicking that icon there, and grab our eyedropper tool. Once we do that, we're going to see that we have a couple of points in this image, and what we're looking for is, in this case, the background. I'm assuming the background is close to neutral, so I'm hoping that may help me out a little bit. And I'm also setting a point on the image here. To set a point, you hold down the Shift key and click to remove it. Hold down the Shift key and drag it off the image. Alright, well we have 2 points here. And what we're going to do is set these points, and then we're going to go to our info palette, and we're going to change the values to CMYK. Here we can see the CMYK values. The background point, number 2 here, is in RGB, because what I'm thinking is that background may be neutral. It also may not be neutral, but it could help me a little bit as I'm color correcting this image. I'm going to click on the layer Original. Next, I'm going to open up a Curves Adjustment layer. And I'm going to option click the background to have the 10 by 10 grid. And I'm going to look at my CMYK numbers. Here are the before numbers and here are the after numbers. One of the areas that is definitely problematic is the green magenta channel. Now I need to bring my magenta channel way down. I also want to make sure my yellow channel is the highest. Next problem channel that I'm going to go to is the cyan or the red cyan channel. Command 1 or click it from the drop down menu. And what I need to do here is decrease the amount of cyan in this image. Remember I said that your cyan needs to be 1/3 to 1/5 of your magenta yellow. One of the ways you can remember this is simply multiply this number by 3 or by 5. So 3 times 11 is 33, or 5 times 11 is 55. So I'm right in the range there for this number in regards to it being 1/3 to 1/5 of my magenta yellow. Now my magenta is a little bit too high, so I need to take a little bit more out so that's lower than my yellow. And I'm looking at my RGB values. Now, these values are close, so they're approaching neutrality, yet it's not quite neutral. I'm going to say most likely my background isn't neutral, and I'm going to trust my skin tone numbers. Let's go ahead and click OK, and let's look at our before and after. Ah, the image looks so much better because now it is color correct by the numbers. We will be working on the file advancecolor.psd. Go ahead and open up the file. And as a side note, I want to give a quick shout out thanks to Andre Nadis, who provided this image for us. And one of the things I want to point out for starters is that you'll notice there is a folder titled Reference. That folder includes all of the layers that we'll be creating in this movie, so you have those as a reference if you need to go back to them later. Well, you can see that we have the image as shot, and there's some problems with the image. We need to fix this image up, and we're going to do that in this movie and the subsequent movies. For starters, the first thing that I want to do is go to Select Color Range, and click on the red sardine can. Grab the plus sign here. I'm going to click around the sardine can so that I have a nice selection of that. Click OK. Now you can see I have a pretty good selection of the sardine can. I'm going to now select the adjustment layer icon and choose Curves. And what this is going to do is it's going to help me zero in on a specific area of the image. In this case, you can see this is just affecting the product there. I don't want to affect the product. I want to affect everything else. So I'm going to invert my mask by pressing Command or Control I. Alright, now that I have everything else, I'm going to go back to my Curves adjustment layer, hold down the Option Alt key to reset this, and I'm going to add an S-curve. As a side note, CS3 now has built-in S-curves. If you go to medium contrast, well, there's a pretty nice S-curve. I'm going to crank this up a little bit more. I'm just looking at the background in this case. At this point, it's somewhat of a subjective edit. Before and after, just increasing the contrast and the overall color. That looks pretty good. Now that I have that dialed in, I'm ready to work on the overall color of the image, so I'm going to go to my adjustment layer icon and open up a Curves layer. Now that I have this Curves dialog window open, I'm going to push this over to the side a little bit here, hold down the spacebar and reposition my image so I can actually see what I'm doing, and then jump straight to the red channel, Command or Control 1. Alright, now that we're on the red channel, what I'm going to do here is just visually work on this image. And I'm just going through this image, visually just seeing where I need to go with this bad boy. Working on the red channel, going to go to the greens. Alright, that looks pretty good. Command or Control 3, the blue channel. And all that I'm doing here is just simply visually looking at the image, going through some detail steps on my Curves adjustment layer in order to work on the different tonal areas of the image. And the trick with all of this is that it's the combined total of all of these layers which is going to give us the best results. Let's click OK and see how we're doing. There's our before and after. Alright, well that looks pretty good for our initial first pass. We have more ground to cover, and you got it, we're going to do that in the next movie.